Back in the late 90s, I was driving along US 169. This is in Minnesota, right by a very small hole-in-the-wall town called Page, of a population of maybe 500 at the time. This is when I saw something off the side of the road to my right. At the time, I was driving northbound, and as I approached closer, this dark figure stood up all the way, and it was right then and there that I got a fairly good look at what it was that had stood up. I estimate a height of around 8 feet tall. It was very hairy, long stringy hair, and quickly crossed in front of my vehicle in the dip of land in the median between both highways. It had very wide arm-to-shoulder shoulders and a large head, very pointed ears on the top, and long, very gnarly-looking legs, which almost went all the way up to its stomach, or so it looked. It had a weird lean to it as it walked forward, and did not walk straight up like that of a person would. It all happened very quickly. If I had to give a size to it, I would say it was pretty heavy-set and muscular, and very long-legged, almost disproportionately so, because the way it walked, I got the impression it could travel very fast, having very long strides. Again, it was on 2 legs, and walked across the road so fast that there's no humanly way possible that it could have been anybody in a suit. Why would anybody be in some convincing werewolf costume at 2:30 in the morning on the side of a highway? It just doesn't make any sense. That would have been the very first time that I saw this strange creature. Then, about 2 years later, this happened. A friend and I were driving back home from late at night again, driving through a small section of woods near another small town in Minnesota. It was also late at night, and we were driving very slowly. We were getting these awful whiffs of wet dog and rotting flesh. I had asked my friend if they had smelt anything while we were driving. Our windows were rolled up, so the smell was coming in through the AC. They said no. I was thinking about having them stop, but I was too focused on the road ahead of me. I asked them if they had seen anything, off the side of the road or on the side of the road, and nothing. But the smell continuously got worse. It was wet dog, but there was more decaying, rotting flesh smell than anything else. It was pretty pungent. Then, that's when we see these 2 large eyes pop up from the side of the road. In fact, the exact same side that I saw this creature from a couple years prior. It popped up, and then quickly leapt all the way across this 2-lane road into the other section of woods. Maybe about a 15-foot leap, all within 2 seconds. I didn't get as good of a look, but it looked to be nearly identical to the creature I saw prior, a couple years before. Even though we were roughly 300 miles away from that spot, it looked to be even uglier, and maybe a larger version of what I saw. It really freaked my friend out. He kept going on and on about what was that, and I calmly brought up my story from 2 years ago, saying that I think I saw some sort of strange creature, since I never brought up that story anyway. I mean, nobody would believe me. I was freaked out too, but I feel like now that he saw it, and I saw it, I can bring up my story and give him some reassurance that I too saw it and had seen it before. Although it didn't really help. We were both pretty scared, and double-timed it back to his house. We haven't talked about it since. I mean, this was nearly 20+ years ago, but it serves as a reminder to be careful on the back roads in the middle of the night. You never know what might pop out of the woods, whether it be deer or something else. As far as the creature I saw, or I guess we saw, I have no idea what it is. Even though it looked werewolf-like, I don't believe it was truly a werewolf, since the idea of somebody transforming under a full moon just seems ridiculous. But I think that this might be some sort of undiscovered wolf animal, or maybe a hybrid of sorts. Maybe the only hybrid wolf bipedal creature that lives in North America. I don't know. I'm just trying to speculate, because that's the only thing that could possibly make sense. I didn't feel any harm, like it wanted to kill us or hurt us. I just feel like maybe both times I'd caught it off guard. If you've ever had the pleasure of driving through a blizzard, you'll know that it's not fun. If you've ever had to do it, you'll know that conditions can be extremely dangerous and even prove fatal if you're not careful. This very evening that I was driving through a solid whiteout, and at the time was up near the border of Canada in the winter, when I was in this horrendous snowstorm. Completely white all around me. I could barely even see the road. I don't even know if there was other vehicles around me, because it was completely whited out. And then I saw something, appearing out of the left-hand side, coming in my direction, approaching me. It stuck out like a sore thumb, which is probably the only reason I even noticed it in the first place, was because just how dark it was, kind of like it was absorbing the light around it. White and snow reflect light, but this seemed to absorb it. I know it's a strange description, but that's what it was like. Almost kind of a supernatural quality to it. It looked exactly like a huge dog, at least the silhouette of it. And the first thing I noticed, besides its ears and head, was this large silhouette, this huge upright dog walking on its hind legs. Then, I noticed very tall, pointy, perky ears, and a massive head, easily like putting a lion's head on a dog body, completely disproportionate, and didn't even seem physically possible. It came so fast towards my vehicle, I had to swerve off to the side of the road, in hopes this thing would not hit my vehicle. Well, I was going slow enough that I was able to turn my steering wheel in the opposite direction and press on the gas, knowing that I was easily risking my life and the safety of others around me. But this thing then jetted off in the opposite direction, away from my vehicle. I'm very lucky I did not crash or skid off into a ditch, or worse. What it was, I have no idea. I remember at the time, all I can think to myself was, what was that? I can tell you for sure that it was not a dog. That much I do know. But what thing looks like a dog, at least in silhouette form, and walks on two legs? And where did it come from? Why was it approaching my vehicle? It creeped me out, and I never stopped thinking about it, all the rest of the way up into Canada. Back in 1994, I saw something that I'll never forget. It was pretty late at night, around 2:33 a.m. in the morning, and I was working on scraping all the snow off my car window, since my job required me to get up early and leave early. It was at least an hour commute, and I had to be there by 4:30 sharp. And in this point in time, I was in easily the worst shape of my life. This was long back before I got in really fit shape, and at the time was drinking copious amounts of coffee, energy drinks, and anything I could to even function during the day. I was getting terrible sleep at night, probably due to my diet, so I tried to make up for it any time I could. But that's besides the point. After getting all the snow off my car, I got in and got ready to head off to work, when I saw the most strange animal in my life approaching my vehicle from the front. My mind began racing as I realized just how large this animal was, and then it did something that was more terrifying than you could ever imagine. It, whatever this thing was, stood up on two legs and crossed my 7-foot wide path right up to my vehicle, crouched down on one knee, and looked right at me through the front of my window. It had a dark reddish-brown fur covering its entire body. I'll never forget how scared I was. It was even taller standing up on two legs than the very top of my car. It stood at least 7 feet tall, and stood very comfortably, just like a man would. The face was what really stuck out to me, and what really gave it away as something not of this world. It looked like a cross between a wolf and a monkey's face, with a pronounced brow, large jawbones, and a mouth full of long, sharp teeth. and a shorter, more condensed muzzle. It also had human-like characteristics to its face, more around the corners of its mouth and its eyes, like it could give proper expression. Frozen and terrified, not sure what I should do, just slammed the car into drive, putting my foot all the way down on the gas pedal, as if I had a lead foot. I flew forward, and this thing dove out of the way just in time to avoid being hit. But it's not like me hitting it with my tiny car would have done anything. My car would have been the one to take the damage from whatever this thing was. But when it leapt out of the way, it was like lightning fast, inhumanly possible, like the blink of an eye just gone out of the way, and I drove forward onto my driveway road and off onto the side road. I flew out of there much faster than I should have. In fact, I'm surprised I did not wreck. It was considerably cold that morning, and there was lots of ice and moisture on the road. I could have easily flew off the road and hit a tree and died. But I didn't care. Anything to get me away from whatever that creature was. I have a pretty scary encounter to share with you. This happened back in 1989 when I was a senior in high school, and I took my girlfriend outside of the city of New Orleans to a low bayou. This would have been at nighttime, and we wanted to escape from the wrath of our parents. We had it planned out all week long. We would leave on Friday without our parents ever knowing. I would take my dad's car. We'd go out to this nice little bayou in this spot we'd gone to before and make out. And if I was lucky, maybe even more would come from it. Well, I'm here to tell you that even in my own horny 18-year-old self, nothing ever did, and here's why. I picked up my girlfriend. We went out to our perfect spot on this calm little bayou. We laid a blanket down, and things got hot and heavy pretty quick. And just like typical horror movie fashion, my girlfriend started freaking out, thinking she heard something. I tried to convince her that it was nothing. It was just the sound of things around us, animals and whatnot, that we were totally fine. We made out for another moment or two, where she began screaming and pointing. Confused, I looked to see in the direction she was pointing at. In the trees, maybe about 30-40 feet away, was the face of a large wolf-looking shape. That's the best I can describe it to you. It was dark, and there was only a little bit of moonlight, so you couldn't see the best. But what was sticking out of the trees looked to be that of a very large wolf head. Just going by the details of the lighting we could see, I didn't see any eyes, but it looked kind of creepy looking. And she said that wasn't there before. It's staring at us. Oh my gosh, we gotta get out of here. It's gonna get us. I tried to calm her down, saying it's just an illusion, since it wasn't moving. Or maybe it was a part of the trees. But then it did start to move, back and forth, like it was swaying, getting ready to charge. And that's how I can best describe it to you. This really put us both in a very uneasy spot and freaked us out. We both got up and started running back to the car, knowing full well we had just encountered some sort of wolf-looking thing out in the wilderness. Not sure what it was. I never thought of it as a werewolf, but it did definitely give off a very bad vibe, and judging by the size of that head, I have no idea what kind of giant wolves live out in the bayous of Louisiana, but I was not about to find out that night. That same girlfriend and I actually ended up marrying in 1993, and 9 years later, divorcing in 2002. We had 3 kids together, and she passed away of breast cancer back in 2011. I'm going to keep my details and my identity pretty anonymous and vague, just for my own protection, in case, for whatever reason, the wrong person listens and hears this. I know I might be overly paranoid sounding, but you can never be too sure with sharing such sensitive information. Years back, for about 7 months, I worked as a park ranger, as well as participating in some search and rescues. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and in fact, I experienced some very strange things that I feel it's important to talk about. The people whom I worked with, I still have fairly good relationships with, at least most of them, even though this is well over 8-9 years ago. Before I get to anything, let me just say that before this job, I did not believe in the entire alien UFO phenomenon. I thought it was a huge hoax, just made up stuff to put on the internet for people's entertainment. But after my 7 months on the job, well, my opinion changed, and let me tell you why. We had at least 4 instances that I can recount on the top of my head, probably more if I really try to sit down and think about it. Instances of people disappearing and reappearing for a considerable amount of time that did not make sense. The first being an older lady, roughly 68 or 67, fairly good shape, hiking by herself, and just vanished. Vanished like there was no trace of her left. I do very vividly remember the search and rescue mission looking for her. The dogs would stop and start whining right on the spot that she disappeared. We could not find any trail scent. We could not find any trace of her belongings or clothes. She was heavily equipped, backpack, camping equipment and all, and very survival smart. We found nothing. About 6 weeks go by, and she's there, same trail as always, coming back the direction she came from, acting strange when people were reacting to her, saying that she had only been gone for maybe an hour at most. Apparently, she had no idea that it was now roughly 6 weeks later, and was shocked when proven on the calendar and other sources of technology that proved to her that 6 weeks did indeed pass. So what happened? Did she just walk into another dimension and come back? It doesn't make any sense. I should also add that there was nothing wrong with her. No clothing marks, no dirt. She hadn't even aged. Of course, you're not going to age in 6 weeks really, but you know what I mean. She looked exactly the same, clothing and all, as the day she disappeared. When she was taken into custody and interviewed, she said that she just hiked, went down the trail, and came back like nothing ever happened. The only major difference here is that on the day she disappeared, it was very, very sunny, and on the day she came back, there was considerable amounts of overcast. When asked about that, she simply stated that on her way back down the trail, a considerable amount of cloud coverage occurred, meaning overcast. Now, there's a lot of speculation around this story, specifically her. Some say she was abducted by aliens, as that's the only real thing that can explain the passing of time, and her not changing any shape, form, and remaining perfectly intact, just as the day she was. Compare that to other similar phenomenons around other people going missing and turning up months later, sometimes years later, in exactly the same state they were when they disappeared. Also having absolutely no knowledge of them ever disappearing in the first place, or if it is, it's very vague, like they saw a white light, or something along those lines. This lady had no idea she was ever gone. The month she disappeared was early April to around mid-May. There was also speculation that she walked into a time portal, somehow. Again, no real evidence to back that up. I thought the alien thing was a lot more plausible, and at the time, it really freaked me out, but still wasn't a nail in the coffin yet. Then it would happen again, in June. 2 small boys actually, twins, 4 years old. I'll never forget these boys, named Jacob and Isaac, both wearing white shirts and blue coveralls. Very sweet little boys. They disappeared early June. Last seen, chasing or playing tag, running around in circles around a big fir tree. Then next thing you know, they're gone. No trace of them. Same thing ensued. A large 7-day search and rescue mission. Found absolutely no trace of them. Parents, after about a month, were convinced they were dead, had a funeral service, they moved on with life as best they could. Then, right around Labor Day, I think it was about 3 days after to be exact, so maybe September 14th, if my dates are correct, They appeared exactly the same state they were in, and you'll never get this. Running around the same fir tree they were running around when they were last seen. Still playing tag. Still in the exact same clean white shirt and blue coveralls. Same haircut. They hadn't missed a meal. They looked perfectly healthy and content. The same day as they left. Like the previous woman and other accounts. They had no idea time had even passed. And at this point, it had easily been 3 months since their disappearance. Officials, police, and their parents, nobody could explain their disappearance, what happened, or how it happened. But a similar situation where the parents took their eyes off their boys for just a moment to grab something while they were cooking, and boom, gone. This one also freaked us out. We got a chance to talk to the boys, me specifically. They had no idea anything ever happened. Their account, as best a 4-year-olds can give, is they were playing around a fir tree. Next thing you know, mom and dad have different clothes on, different haircuts, just basically a 4-year-old's recounting of how mom and dad now look a little bit different because 3 months had passed, and dad might have a little bit of a beard, and mom's hair might be a little bit longer or shorter. You know, the best a 4-year-old can describe. And like the lady before them, absolutely no trace of them going anywhere, or having any sort of memory of where they were. Were they abducted and experimented on by aliens? I don't know. It's hard to say. But this one for me really sealed the deal. But then there would be 2 others. These 2 were also very strange. This next man, I won't mention his last name, but his first name was Martin. He was 38 years old, had apparently disappeared 3 years prior to this happening, and this would have been the beginning of October. Suddenly reappeared in the same clothing and everything he had on the day he had disappeared. I believe he had disappeared about 3.5 years earlier, although his account was a little bit different than the previous. He tells us, when he was eventually found and interviewed, that a bright light engulfed him, and for a while, he was wandering around in complete whiteness. Yes, he used the word whiteness, like a void of nothing but light and white, if that makes any sense. Although something of that description is really hard to even understand. He says during this time, he had no idea of any time passing. He also felt no feelings in his body, like hunger, sleep deprivation, thirst, bathroom, or any of that. He claims he has no idea how long he was there, but wandered aimlessly for what felt like months if not years, but in all actuality, said it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. He claims it was almost an out-of-body experience. The next thing you know, everything goes back down in light. He described the words as it dimming down, and then he was back here, in his body, in the same clothes he wore. He was not lying on the ground unconscious. In fact, he was still very much alert. He was surprised more than anybody else that 3.5 years had fully passed, and it was now October, because when he disappeared, I believe it was March for him 3 years prior. Now, this very last one to me is by far the weirdest, and once I tell you, you'll understand why. So, we found this man about 2 weeks after Martin, and to be honest with you, if the 2 boys, Jacob and Isaac, hadn't sealed the deal, there's no way you could go through this case and not believe. This man, his name was Brandon. He was 46 years of age, kind of an older guy. But here's the thing. He had been gone for 7 years, disappeared without a trace, and when he was found again, in the middle of the park, just out of nowhere, he was in almost these white-like robes, kind of like robes that a priest would wear at a temple. He had a very long beard, but looked very upkept, very clean. When he was asked about who he was and his identification, he seemed to be fully aware and cognizant of everything around him, even how much time had passed, and that he knew he had been gone. But it gets much weirder than this. When he was interviewed and asked, he said he was at the park on a trail, where he was taken and also like the other man, engulfed in a white light. He said it was there that he met beings, and according to his time frame, spent 10 years in what Brandon described, just like Martin, as a place full of light and void. He said these beings that he mentored under, he specifically used the word mentor, taught him several languages, which he didn't know before. Here's the other weird thing. They taught him full-on Chinese. I mean, he could speak it extremely fluently. After speaking to his family to make sure he's not crazy, he was never able to speak it before. So, now this man of 7 years now all of a sudden returns, wearing white priest-like robes, with a long beard, very upkept, and weirdly can speak very fluent Chinese, more than enough to actually live in that country. And on top of that, says he learned it and was taught it by these white translucent beings in this white void in which he was engulfed by a white light and brought back the same way. Unlike Martin, he knew how much time had passed, and he knew he had been gone for X amount of time. But even though he was actually missing for 7 years, he claims he was in this dimension for 10 years. Now, I know what you're thinking, that this sounds absolutely insane, and I thought the same thing too. But when you get a chance to see this firsthand, to be on these search and rescue missions and to talk to these people, there's really no way to explain this thoroughly. I was feeling like I was living in an actual episode of the X-Files. I felt like I was in some sort of alternate universe. Nothing made sense. So the only thing I could really pinpoint is that there really must be alien life, and for whatever reason is abducting people. I can't really explain why all 4 of these people had different experiences. 2 having very similar experiences, and the other 2 having very similar experiences. It doesn't really make sense to me, but I guess that doesn't matter in the long run. This kind of stuff happened, and shortly after Brandon had been found, I decided to quit. It was too much for me. I don't know how experienced park rangers or people in that service industry can handle it. I mean, it just goes beyond normalcy. With all of this said, do I really believe that UFOs or aliens had a hand in all of these things? Yes, I do. There's no other way to explain these weird abductions or lapses of time, or in Brandon's case, being taken, clothing being completely different, having a beard grown out, which, by the way, when he disappeared, was a clean-cut, clean-shaven guy. Never knew a drop of Spanish or any other language besides English. And now apparently he comes back looking like a prophet of some religion, speaking full-blooded Chinese. Nothing really makes sense. And his story, if you ever actually got the chance to sit there and listen to his 2-hour recount of it, was just incredibly strange. I was only given bits and pieces, major components of his tale, but that these strange, translucent, spiritual beings taught him multiple languages, which apparently don't exist anymore, and he would not speak them, for fear of a reason I can't remember, but said they taught him full Chinese. You just think about how crazy that is, and how much it doesn't make sense. It scared the hell out of a lot of detectives and people working on that specific case, and many of us rangers it spooked us, because you clearly can't explain something like that. This was something truly supernatural in every sense. Look, I don't know what it is you want to call these things. Werewolves, dogmen, dog soldiers. I don't know. But these things are flat out violent and very dangerous. Let me tell you my story that nearly cost me my life. For this story, we have to go back to wintertime of 2009. Somewhere around February or March, we had passed the worst part of winter, but it was still very wet and very cold. This night I was driving home, and was driving down a steep mountainside, filled with trees and forest all around me. The roads were very curvy, and although it was above freezing, you still had to be careful. Things were very wet. As I'm making my way down to the base of the grade, there is a sharp turn. As I'm doing this, I noticed off to my left, there was some sort of, at the time, large animal trailing me through the woods. I got ready to slam on my brakes, thinking a large buck was about to emerge through the woods and run across the road. But as I slowed down, that didn't happen. In fact, whatever this was following me also stopped too. That's when I got a little unnerved, and I began driving. Then, this thing quickly followed suit, staying within the tree line, but also keeping up with my vehicle at about 30 to 35 miles an hour, which for a deer, if that was the case, isn't a hard feat. This goes on for maybe a mile or two, and now I'm beginning to feel uncomfortable about the situation. No animal of that size that I can see from the shadows follows a vehicle like this. This almost felt predatory in nature. Hear me out. My gut instinct was screaming at me to go faster. Already, I knew this wasn't a bear. This wasn't a wolf, and I know cougars or mountain lions don't get this big. Something was following me, and whatever it was, I don't know. So I began to speed up to about 40, 45. On the part of the road I was at, since I had passed down the grade, it was now straight, beginning to curve slightly to the right. And as I got to the curve, this horrendous-looking thing burst through the woods and charged at the backside of my small little Nissan truck. This thing shot with incredible speed and latched itself onto my back rear tire. The sheer force of the impact of it latching onto my back left tire was so strong, it sent my vehicle swerving, and as this happened, it tore the back left tire completely off the axle, along with the rubber and the frame, and God knows what happened. In this motion, the entire truck flipped several times and landed on the side of the road, all while I remained in the truck. Of course, the accident and impact left me unconscious, with a severe concussion and several scratches and bruises. But thanks to my seatbelt, I did not end up being projected through the windshield, being smashed by my truck. The next thing I remember, police are pulling me out of the vehicle, and I remember having a light shone in my face, probably checking for vitals. And then I lost consciousness again. Then I woke up again in the hospital, and I had a doctor come in, maybe 15-20 minutes after I regained consciousness, to tell me briefly what happened. Apparently there was an accident, and, luckily, some passerby drove by, saw that I was unresponsive, called 911, and you probably know the story from here. This all took place over the course of several hours. Luckily, even though I had a concussion and scratches and bruises, I'm okay, and nothing long-term or severe happened to me. When they had asked what happened, I immediately recounted seeing this horrible thing out of my side mirror, charging towards my vehicle. Before I even spoke, I knew if I told them what I really saw, they would probably immediately attribute it to me not being sober. I've never done a lick of drugs in my life. Sure, I'm drinking now and then, but I'm not really much of a drinker. In fact, I much prefer the life of sobriety more than anything else. So, I bit my tongue, waited a few seconds, and then told them I saw a large bear charge after my vehicle. The doctor's eyes became wide, and he asked me, "Are you sure a bear can tear the tire off a car like that? What did you do to provoke it?" I just looked at him and shrugged my shoulders. I did speak to the police briefly as well, giving them a very similar story. I couldn't afford to tell them the truth. I knew I wouldn't be taken seriously if I did. They probably would have either discredited me, attributed it all to drugs or alcohol, or threw me in the loony bin. None of the three I really wanted. Luckily, I was able to get a new truck soon afterwards, since the truck was completely totaled. But forget about those irrelevant details. I know what you're wanting to hear about. The thing that attacked me and my truck. To be honest with you, I have no idea what animal it was. I've never seen or heard of anything that looked like it. It did resemble a werewolf, I'll be honest with you. But I don't know what you want to call it. I've heard people refer to it as a dogman, and I know the concept of a werewolf is somebody transforming under a full moon. I don't even know if that's the case, but this thing was definitely an upright, walking wolf-looking creature. Long, black hair, tall, pointy ears, striking yellow eyes, and a very large head, full of crocodilian-like teeth, protruding out of its lower and upper jaw. This thing had the strength of a lion, as it pounced with incredible speed, and as soon as it latched onto my back tire, just the sheer inertia sent my vehicle tumbling, and in that one fluid motion tore the tire right off the back of the axle, and that's when I had the accident. It all happened so fast that it might be hard to recount the exact details, but I don't know what it did afterwards. I don't know where it went to, and I don't understand why it pointed out my truck and attacked it when it did. After I crashed, I guess I was technically just a hanging piece of meat that it could have easily gotten to, had it shown the power already to clearly tear the tire off an axle. Why didn't it come after me? I don't know. And who knows how long I was really sitting there, hanging upside down, until the passerby found me. The road I was traveling down isn't well traveled, and it could have been easily 30+ minutes before somebody even drove by and saw me. Makes me shudder to still think about. I don't know how this winter's been for you, in whatever state you're living in, but over here in western Pennsylvania, it's been pretty crazy. Crazier than usual, which is saying a lot, considering we're a state that gets hit with tons of snow every year. I think somewhere of around 100 inches or so every year. Like I said, it's a lot of snow. You better get used to it if you're living out here. Another thing we have a lot here in Pennsylvania is wildlife, which brings me to the reason why I'm writing you. I found tracks outside my barn this morning. Tracks I don't quite understand. They're clearly made from a canine, but no canine I know gets this big. I'll have to upload the pictures and send them to you via email, but I didn't want to waste your time, so I thought I'd reach out to you first, get confirmation that it's okay, and send them over. They're pretty large in size, easily 12 inches if not bigger. We're talking huge canine tracks. Whatever made this had to have easily been the size of a grizzly bear, if not bigger. I know that doesn't even sound possible, but I cannot think for the life of me what dog breed could make these. The other thing that really bothers me is the track pattern is not quadrupedal, meaning it isn't from a four-legged animal, judging by the way the stride is. It appears to be more bipedal. You can clearly see the stride pattern. It's like somebody was walking on two legs, walking around. And the other weird thing, wearing fake werewolf canid boots. The impression in the snow is quite deep, meaning that whatever made these tracks not only had tremendous stride, but must have weighed a considerable amount. I'm around 270 pounds, a bigger guy, if you will, and I'm 6'2". Even me, with all my snow gear on and my boots, can't even make half the indent as these do. So something is out there doing this. I know of Dogman, and I've heard there are legends all around the entire Great Lakes area, from Wisconsin to Michigan, and even all over western Pennsylvania. I've never seen one myself, but I've heard many stories from friends and family growing up. I never really wanted to believe they existed, but now, I guess I have no choice but to second guess. The footprints actually come out of a small section of woods that back up to acres and acres of national forest. This small section of woods kind of tails out, down to around where my house is, and where the neighborhood is. I would say from my barn to the small section of woods, or tree line, is maybe 100 yards, but I haven't actually measured. The tracks lead all the way from the tree line to my barn, and then just seem to disappear. There's no traces of which direction it went, and I don't think it jumped on my roof, considering my barn is roughly 20+ feet high. So I'm not really sure what to make of this. The tracks just literally disappear right as they go up against my barn, and it's the back side of the barn, where there's no window, there's no door. I currently do not have any live animals, just old hay and old barn supplies, so I'm not sure if there is anything remotely interesting for whatever animal making this to get into. I don't know. I have far more questions than answers, and I'm hoping, with your aid, you can help me answer many of them. Thanks for your time. My grandfather, who, rest his soul, is now passed, used to work as a police officer and eventually a sheriff for well over 30 years of his life. One of the most horrifying stories he ever told me about was when he had gotten a call from a fellow. By the way, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. Which year, I don't exactly know. Anyway, they got a call from a fellow on a small farm nearby, having complaints about some unknown animal attacking and killing all the cattle. Upon arriving there, he said he was nearly attacked and killed by what he describes as a large upright dog that hid itself amongst the trees and would jump down at his car, nearly tearing the engine out of his vehicle and nearly taking my grandfather's life had he not shot it in his eye and blown it out. At least that's what he told me. He always had a really hard time retelling the story. He would shake really bad, and you could tell it really stirred him up. In fact, he didn't even like talking about it, and the only time he ever did is when I kept asking him to retell the story. I probably had him retell it to me at least 4 times, and guess what? The details never changed. His reaction was always the same. I think he suffered from mild PTSD from it. Said he had never seen an animal like it, but after that farm had continuous calls about similar situations, livestock going missing, cattle appearing dead and mutilated. He would never respond to the calls or have somebody else go and take care of it. Not after that. He also had a very hard time explaining that what happened to his car. He said that a bear or something larger than a bear attacked him, but as you would know, saying that kind of thing around town, especially in the small town my grandfather grew up in and policed in, didn't take him very far. In fact, he was often mocked, made fun of, and even risked his career at several points. I wish I could give you more details on what happened, but he never really did go into vivid detail of what the creature looked like, other than it was very tall, large, pitch black, and hid up in the trees. I do remember him using the term panther, like it very much so acted like a black panther in its movements and how agile it was, but said it clearly looked like a very large dog. Same color though, pitch black, had massive claws, and said he can never forget about how striking its red amber eyes looked. Anyway, I know it's not too much of a story, but I feel like I would chip in my family's creepy Dogman story, because I feel like it's pretty relevant, especially with how popular Dogman is. Plus, after that, we have no idea what happened. My grandfather eventually retired, about 16 years or so after the incident, so the mid to late 90s. He never dealt with anything like that again, never really talked about it, and then he passed away sometime after. So, unfortunately, he's not alive now to get more information out of him. As far as that farm, well, it's only about 25-30 minutes away from my house currently. Do I have any plans to go around it and visit it? No. But, here's another thing. I guess that farm is very close to a national forest. How creepy is that? Hi, my name is Ella, and here's a story of the time that my family went over to Australia to visit family, and it ended up not being pleasant for these reasons which I will explain. I will first tell you that there's my mother Kelly, who's well in her 40s, about 5'3", and quite frightened at a lot of things. My dad Brian, who's a strong believer in the paranormal, and loves scary things. He's about 5'8", strong build. There's my sister, Alex, 20 years old. Not much to say about her, other than I personally find her annoying most of the time. It's always like a competition with her. Lastly, me, Katie, who's 15, 5'4", female, and I kind of have the same personality as my dad. Anyway, we were all so excited to be making a trip to the land down under. My parents had been saving up hard for a while to be able to go over there. My uncle lives over there with his girlfriend, and has now for about 15 years. We were ecstatic to be seeing them. My mother told me most of the plans were for when we were over there. One of them included a road trip in the outback. I'm a very paranoid person, and the thought of all the things that could possibly go wrong were making me feel ill, even though I was still very excited. Mixed emotions, I know. But the thing that scared me the most was thinking about the show Wolf Creek. For those who don't know, it's a show about a serial killer in the outback who acts friendly to people, then kills them, while trying to play a game of cat and mouse. This terrified me, and I'm sure it did to my dad too, since he also watched. It's a very gory, horrible show. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody with a weak stomach. I mean, I wish I never watched it. I'll skip forward, past all the getting over there, getting settled in and whatnot. I'll begin on the day of the road journey. It was 6 of us going all together, along with my uncle's dog, who's very gentle, and also getting quite old. The vehicle we were traveling in was an old RV, which my uncle and dad both rented, going half on the money. I was excited. I packed all my things I needed, even brought a small pocket knife, since I told you, I'm already paranoid. It was 5 a.m. We got up, and it was still dark out. It took us a good hour to get going, so we left around 6. We finally left the house, and I knew this was going to be quite the adventure. My uncle drove the RV, but my dad and him were taking turns. We had a map in case we got too lost, which of course will come in handy. Australia is a very big place, and even my uncle, who's lived there for well over 15 years now, could easily get lost. I think it took us around 2 hours to eventually enter the dry, empty desert roads. There was only a few small cars driving by, every so often, but not much people at all. I charged my MP3 player, so I just plugged in my headphones and listened to some music to try and calm my nerves. The thought of anything going possibly wrong was just too much. We stopped off a bunch of times to take in the view, get pictures of kangaroos in the distance. When I looked down the road, you could clearly see the heat rising, causing a mirage. I thought that was pretty cool. It was really hot. I'd guess if you stayed out here long enough, you could die. We got back on the road again and drove for hours and hours. I think it was around 9 p.m. when it started to get dark. It was really beautiful when it was dark. The sky was full of stars. I remember taking a few photos of them. It was fully dark now, and my dad was driving at this point. I was talking to my mother and my aunt about how beautiful it was being out here, and how this was such an experience. My aunt began telling me stories about creepy things that happen out in the desert. She's a wise person. She's the type who knows a lot of things that can't be explained. I felt safer with her out on the road. Definitely. But not gonna lie, the stories she was telling me about the unexplained things out in the desert were starting to scare me. But I didn't let her know that. I just listened in awe to her. She told me a story that I was interested in. A story about the Min Min lights. Basically, Min Min is a light phenomenon that has often been reported in the outback of Australia. Stories about the lights can be found in Aboriginal myths, predating European settlement, and have been part of a wider Australian folklore. She told me how it believed that the Min Min lights are the spirits of the dead Aborigines, whose souls lie in the outback still. It didn't make me scared. I found it more fascinating and spiritual. I sat back, tried to relax again. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was 2:30 in the morning. My sister and mom were asleep, But my uncle, dad, and aunt were all awake, talking. My aunt came over to me, and we're just talking about random stuff. It was nice though, as she's a good listener. We looked out the window of the RV, and it was magical outside. More stars than I've ever seen. I eventually fell back asleep on the pull-out chair, and it was not comfortable. My uncle was still driving, and my aunt and dad were asleep now too. I awoke again at 4 a.m. I don't know why I woke up so suddenly, but it felt like it was from a sound or something. My heart was beating so fast. I calmed myself down, went to reach for my water, and gulped down a lot of it. I said hello to my uncle, who was clearly exhausted from driving, and he started talking with me. I made him some coffee for his troubles of staying awake, sat back down, and just looked out the window again in awe at the mysterious wonders of the sky. Wait, what? What's that in the sky? I said in a shaky voice. He stopped the RV, parked it at the side of the road. By how shaken up I sounded, everyone else was still asleep. My uncle approached me near the window as I peered out. He took one look at what I was looking at, and his eyes widened, screaming at me to get down. He ran over to my aunt, who was asleep, to wake her up. I felt dizzy, and I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what was happening. I seen my aunt get up, seeming very confused. My uncle whispered to her, but loud enough that I could hear. "The Min lights," he said. She got up straight away, started closing the blinds. I remembered the story she told me, and that's when I actually began to feel sick and scared. I was terrified. I know this was dumb to do, but I was curious to look out the window. So I peered out, and that's when I saw it. These big balls of bright light were heading toward us from a distance. I said to my aunt, "They're not going to do us any harm, are they?" And that's when she explained to me they can, and they will. My uncle told us that we needed to get out, now. He sat back in the driver's seat. There was silence, and he also exclaimed and said no. When I asked what is it, he's not really sure. He told us all that the engine would not start. I felt like crying. All my fears hit me like a brick. My aunt told me and my uncle that we all needed to go out to the back of the RV and use the spare fuel. It was safer that the three of us go. I remember fear taking over me. I don't think I was ready for this. The three of us had to do it, or else we weren't getting out of there. We all crept out into the pitch black of the outback, with only a small torch providing us with any amount of light. We crept quietly. There was a bunker underneath it where the fuel was stored. The sound of crickets stopped, and the entire outback fell into silence. My uncle told me not to look behind me, but of course I couldn't resist. When I did, I seen balls of light getting closer. I told my uncle to hurry up with putting the fuel in. He was nearly done, and my aunt was hugging me, as she knew I was scared, just as much as she was. Then I heard something behind me. I froze with a bad gut feeling. I whispered to my aunt, telling her that I had heard something. We both turned around in silence, holding our breath. I could hear my uncle's dog barking very loud in the RV. He was very much in distress, and I'm surprised my parents or sister did not wake up. I almost screamed, but my aunt stood behind me, holding my waist, and put her hand around my mouth. These two tall, lanky figures were walking toward us. They were in the dark abyss, heading toward us slowly. Humans? No. They were freakishly tall, and their bodies misshaped and weird. The Min lights had disappeared, and I wondered if these figures were the spirits of the lights. My uncle stood up, told us he was done. We didn't reply, as I guess we were both in shock. My uncle told us to get back into the RV now. I couldn't move or speak. I wanted to scream and cry, but I just stood there, staring at these figures getting closer, their eyes glowing white. Their arms were very skinny and bony, and their heads were this very strange shape. I could feel energy building up in my body, my own blood pressure rising, and I was stuck not being able to move with my eyes locked on these creatures' glowing eyes. I felt myself being dragged, and I think it was my uncle trying to get me and my aunt into the RV. We were put back inside, and he put us on the couch. I remember feeling weak and dizzy, and felt myself losing consciousness as my ears continued to ring, a very high-pitched shrill. I don't know how long I was out, but I finally got up to see my aunt still asleep, and my parents and sister now awake. We were in a small town now. It was our destination. I was confused as we were only on the road for about 11 hours. But to get to our destination, it would have taken us 3 days. My mom, sister, and father came over to me, hugged me, and asked if I was okay. I said, "Why are we already here?" My uncle said to my parents that, "Yeah, I told you she was pretty ill and was asleep for 2 days." I couldn't believe it. My mind was racing with questions. I remember hugging them and didn't argue. When we got out into the town, my uncle held me back, and I asked him one question. Was it real? He told me yes, it was, and that he could never let my parents know. All in all, it was one of the craziest, most supernatural experiences I've ever had in my life. And what those beings were, I don't know. Do I think they would have done me harm had they gotten close to me? I didn't want to find out. Who knows what hex or evil they put on me that caused me to feel dizzy, weak, and lose consciousness. I can't even imagine what they would have done to me had they gotten close to me. I'm glad I never found that out. Me and a very close friend of mine spent the entire summer going around spelunking in the caves of New Mexico and Arizona. This is where what I believe we encountered some sort of cave creature. I don't know much about the wildlife in these states, but I'm pretty sure what we heard doesn't match any vocal description of any critter that would live in a cave. I don't know exactly what cave we went into, because it wasn't one that was popularized, or one that you could go into freely. We kind of just like to explore the barren desert, as much as we can, as safe as we can. Usually, we don't traverse into any Narnia-style caves, where it goes on and on forever, into a magical world. Generally, they're just small little hollowed-out caves, maybe a few chambers deep. Nothing to rant and rave about. Nothing to get too excited about. Sometimes you don't find anything. Other times you might find bones here or there. And no human bones. Generally just animal bones. Generally, from what I believe, they're used as small dens of animals, but nothing more exciting than that. I think for my friend and I, it's just the complete and utter thrill of exploring and finding new things. But there's a cavern we found that was in eastern Arizona, I believe, or southeastern Arizona, that we're not exactly sure what was dwelling down in it. We found it in a little alcove in the rock, and when we both fit inside, the chamber was surprisingly very flat, and maybe no bigger than 15 by 15, if I were to think correctly. There was a second chamber, which led down a little bit in a very small tunnel, one that we had to get on our hands and knees and crawl to. Upon arriving in the second chamber, this one opened up quite a bit. I don't know the dimensions, but there was much more room to stand up and move around. There didn't appear to be any animal life. No signs of any bedding down, or nesting, or bones. Really any sign that there was anything ever living in there. But the problem is that we both felt something unnatural, a weird feeling in this tiny cave, something that we've never gotten in other caverns ever before. A feeling like we shouldn't be in there. I don't mean to be cliché and horror story-like, but that's what we felt. My friend and I were both uneasy, even though we didn't discuss it with each other in that moment. I kind of felt a little shaky, a little dizzy and lightheaded, but I figured it might be just due to pressure changes in the air, even though I don't know how likely that is, and there's no way we were more than 20 feet below the surface of the ground. The closer we went into the chamber, or the closer to the next chamber I should say, the more I felt this screaming need to get out, and I learned in this instance that it's bad to ignore your gut instincts. But I wasn't exactly sure why. This large chamber we were in kind of curved a little bit, and once you make it past the curving in the rock, it led to another smaller tunnel in which you had to get on your hands and knees. Although we could look in there and see, it appeared to lead into yet another chamber. We were kind of getting excited, wondering how many chambers this would lead to. But as soon as I got down to all fours and began to poke my head in this tunnel to see how far the tunnel would go and how far into the next chamber, we heard a noise. Me and my friend did. It was very distinctive. The cave was very quiet. You could hear a pin drop, so there's no reason that he wouldn't hear it and only I would. The sound we heard was about a 5 to 10 second growl, a really low rumbling growl. It wasn't rocks falling or rocks colliding. It was distinctly an animal and something very large on the other side of the tunnel in the following chamber. Think of like a lion in the savannas. Take the pitch of that lion and drop it down. Add way more bass to it, and that's what it sounded like. Or maybe a hippopotamus and a wildebeest and a lion all in one. It sounded huge, and it definitely freaked both of us out. It only let out like a low moan growl and then ceased. After that, I looked at my friend, who was very wide-eyed and pale, and we both had the same expression on our face. What was that? Without saying anything, we both motioned to go back, and we did, hastily. We clambered through the other tunnel, back into the first chamber, and very quickly made our way out the very small tunnel up into the ground. We got out of there and decided to cut our day short from that point, even though it was only about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and we'd generally be out till dark, which is around 7 or 8. The following day, we never really discussed it until a few days later when we were on the phone speaking, and I brought up the event, and we started thinking about things that could have been. Unfortunately, there was nothing conclusive to what we think could be in that cave. It was definitely biological, some sort of animal. That much we did know. There was something beyond that small tunnel in the next chamber over. What it was or who it was, we'll never know. And to be honest with you, I'm glad I didn't take a chance to go see what it was for myself, because I feel like had I did, I probably wouldn't be here to tell you my story. But that's all just guessing. Me and my friend, I feel, made the best decision in the situation we had. I believe there are things that hide out in caves that we don't know about. But if it was that big, and it got down past that tunnel into the following chamber, I don't even know how it fit down there. But that would also mean there are other probably larger tunnels that lead to the following chamber. Where they come out in the rock, I don't know. Maybe it was nocturnal. I can say for certainty, though, this was by no means any mountain lion. You could tell by the growl it emitted. It was far too large, far too big set of lungs to be making a sound like that. I was scared. My friend was scared. We obviously both heard something we had never heard before. I don't know if this fits into any of the stories you might read to your audience, but I hope that you'll find it of interest. I used to live in Colorado for quite some time, about 8 or 9 years before moving states, In that time, I gained quite a bit of good friends, a few of them of the Ute tribe, and boy, did they have some crazy stories to share with me. Bigfoots, other creatures you could not imagine, even supposedly skinwalkers. Today, I wanted to share with you a couple of things they told me about, from their tribe and their tradition. They lived up near the mountains. Which ones, I'm not sure, since Colorado is home to many. And overall, I don't know too much about the Ute tribe, and where in Colorado they traveled to, and had villages at. But the stories that were shared with me were terrifying. When these guys, their grandfathers, were younger, and they lived in the villages, they would tell me about how sometimes they would see these giant hairy men come out down from the mountain, steal their women and children during the nighttime, and eat them, or cannibalize. It's terrifying. When these young men, as they grew up, went to hunt these giant men down, they would see them climbing in and out of caves where they supposedly lived, hiding the bodies of the dead children they abducted and the dead women from the night before. I don't know how much of this is true, but supposedly they would kidnap the women and use them for breeding. I don't know how much that would work, and I don't know how much truth there is to that. These were just stories passed on to me and tradition from their tribe. There were also many caves that the fiercest warriors of the tribe at the time would refuse to go near or into due to what was living in them, and not just bears. They believed these giant men, or these giant hairy beasts, would be dwelling in them, living and doing other things. Apparently, close by this same village used to be the den of bears, but it had now been ransacked and cleared through by these large ape-like men who now dwelt in the place. The small den was now littered with human bones and skulls that it would now abduct from the village, like the women and children. Only a few of the warriors of the village actually discovered this before meeting their own demise, while some were able to make it back to the village to actually retell their accounts. While there's not a whole lot of information to share with you here, the premise is that these large human beings, which I believe they're speaking about, are Bigfoot or Sasquatch, many of them hiding out in these caves and waiting until nightfall, or the perfect time to strike the village, to abduct more women and children to eat. Surprisingly, there is a correlation between them and what the natives in Northern California refer to as mountain devils, who did the exact same thing. I don't know if in Northern California they would also hide in caverns, but they would, just like in Colorado, wait for nightfall to come and raid the villages for women and children, to take back and eat. The thought of being a Ute warrior at the time, to go and scout out things, and to come across a cavern, only to have 2 or 3 of these massive hairy human beasts step out and kill you, is terrifying in and of itself. Even if you grew up in combat and being trained to protect your village, there's nothing more terrifying than being outclassed and outnumbered by these beasts that dwell in the caves of the mountain. Okay, so I got a pretty creepy to share with you. This took place back in June and July of 2013. I was going on a road trip with my friends, and we were driving all around the south. We had just come from eastern Texas, and were now in Texarkana, where we thought we'd lay low for a couple of days to kind of just sightsee the area, maybe go on some hikes, or explore the wilderness, since it was really hot and muggy. Just our perfect environment. After talking around with locals and seeing if there was anything interesting to do, we eventually got in a conversation with this older gentleman who used to be a very thorough hunter in the area, had done and seen a lot, and he gave us fair warning of the things that were out in the wilderness. Let me explain to you in a little more detail. He was told, or we were told specifically, to watch out for ground tunnels, is what he referred to. Large openings in the earth that were tunnels that, well, he didn't exactly say where they led to, but he just said, look out for the large animals that come out of them. We were confused, and we asked him if he meant bears, and he clearly said no. These were unlike any animal that you find in the wilderness, and they are extremely dangerous and violent, and we should stay away from them. In fact, after that, he kind of referred to us going out in the wilderness and hiking as a pretty bad idea, and it would be better if we just passed through and found other areas to go through. We kind of thought he was pulling our leg, and that the entirety of what he had to tell us was nonsense. Texarkana is not a small town plagued by monsters. In fact, there are many people around here that love going out fishing in the swamps and doing all sorts of outdoor recreational activities. Surely he was just crazy. But that's when we started talking to other individuals around town. They mentioned similar things. Large ground tunnels is what they referred to it as. I'd never heard of anything like it, and my friends and I all had been around this area more than once. This wasn't our first time through the area, and not our first time in Texarkana. After hearing it from a third person, we eventually just decided to maybe move on and find a more interesting area. Not that we were exactly afraid of running into a ground tunnel entrance. It's interesting to me that nobody gave hint to anything dangerous living in the swamp, like snakes or gators. Just these large underground tunnels that apparently have very large dangerous animals coming in and out of them, and that we were not to be anywhere around them, for our lives were in danger. Very strange. It was a very surreal time. Kind of felt like we were almost in a movie. Some sort of monster serial killer movie, I guess. Anyway, we ended up resuming our road trip and left the state. We never did find out what those ground tunnels were, or what the large animals people were referring to coming out of them. As we entered into other states, we had asked if anybody had ever heard of anything called ground tunnels out in the swamps of the land. Nobody knew what we were talking about. Even people who were hunters or experienced outdoorsmen could know what we meant. They were confused and would ask us, "Do you mean like alligator dens or what?" So it's pretty inconclusive. Maybe there really is something to the Texarkana ground tunnels in that area. I'll tell you what though, I am a little creeped out still, even now 7+ years later, and I don't really want to go out looking for them. Even if the 3 people we spoke to were just lying. I don't know. "4:30 a.m., February 15th, 2021. I was driving home from a friend's apartment in a snowstorm. Woke up super early and had the itch to leave, and being that I did not want to get snowed in. So it's 4 a.m., and I'm in downtown Indianapolis. Nobody's out, except for plows. I don't see any homeless nothing. I live on the eastern side of the city, and for those not familiar, it's urban, but not as any metropolitan. I'm driving very slow, of course, and very, very sober, I might add. So, as I come to this crossing, I see this wolf-coyote creature prance, almost bounce along into this thin alley, nestled between a coffee shop and a gas station. Here is where things get weird. Within seconds, I'm obviously passing the alley, driving slow, and looking for the animal. I do live on the outskirts of the city, and I do encounter some rather cool animals from time to time. So, I'm going like 10 to 15 miles an hour, super slow, to see if I can see it or any tracks. I peer into the alley to see a literal man, mind you. No human is out right now. It's terribly cold and snowing. Sure, homelessness is a huge problem, but I know what I saw. And all within a couple of seconds, I saw a larger dog, wolf, coyote type creature prance into this alley, only to drive by and see a very large figure of what appeared to be a man. The weirdest part were his arms were of rather unusual length, like they were forming upwards. I can't make this up. He was almost stomping along down this tiny alleyway away from me. No animal in sight, and the figure clearly wasn't concerned about a wolf, dog, coyote creature like that would have been. Literally, appeared with long stick-like arms that almost looked like they were droopy. Some of the most trippy stuff I've ever seen. I know what I saw, and it was not normal. All a silhouette. It was very, very strange. The Navajo Reservation is the largest res in the U.S. It goes into New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. This story takes place in the northeastern region of Arizona, near Indian Wells. This was told by people from around that area. If you are heading west on State Highway 15, out towards Dilkin, you come to a stretch of road that goes onto a small valley. I remember going down this road in my youth. If you looked at the horizon, it would seem as if the road kept going, and then suddenly, your car would be pulled down by gravity as you followed the road. It would always give me butterflies when we would go down the slope. When I heard the story about this road, it made my stomach feel different. A man was driving home one night, and it was very late. It was a drive that he had done before, so he wasn't too bothered by it. When you are driving on the res, sometimes there isn't any way to keep cattle from getting on the road. No fences means that you need to be extra aware. I was always told to look for the black horse. If you see a black horse, then you'll be able to see anything else that may wander into the path of your vehicle. So, this man is driving home, not paying too much attention. He drives down the slope, but when he gets to the bottom of the valley, he sees it, but doesn't have enough time to react. Suddenly, a horse comes out of the darkness. He slams on his brakes, but he is unable to stop and hits this horse with his truck. The impact was not enough to deploy the airbags, but the man was tossed around quite a bit by the incident. He turns on his emergency lights, gets out of the car to assess damage. The front of the car was crumpled, and one of the headlights clearly destroyed. He cursed out loud. This was the worst place to have an accident, and he did not have signal to phone for help. He then remembered the horse. The man went into the cab of his truck, got a small keychain flashlight. He then started shunning around, looking for the wounded animal. He heard noises, but they did not sound like a horse. He was positive that he did hit a horse. As he approached the sounds, he could see the animal's fur moving from its ragged breathing. As he got closer, he began to realize what it was. There was a naked elderly woman, wrapped in a large pelt. She was moaning from pain. The man stopped dead in his tracks and got weak from fear. He stumbled back to his truck, and although it did suffer plenty of damage, he was able to get it started and drove off. Once he was able to get signal, he properly called the authorities. An ambulance drove out there and recovered the woman. She was driven to a local health care facility, and due to the fact that many of the healthcare staff were Navajo, nobody wanted to even touch the woman. The woman was apparently known in the community. She was thought to be bedridden. This was shocking because she was so far from home, and the state she was in was immensely off-putting. She still had on her attire when she arrived at the hospital. The nurses called for her family to come. When her family got there, they removed her pelt and her jewelry. The staff were very frightened, but there were some non-Navajo staff that still provided her with care. The elderly woman had only bumps and scrapes. Other than that, she seemed just fine. She was able to get up and walk around the same evening. She went home with her family that same night, but after a couple of days, she passed away. In Navajo culture, if you find out who a skinwalker is, you have the power to destroy them. After the community around Indian Wells found out who, or more fittingly, what this woman was. It was for certain that her time was at an end. Okay, so I'll start off by mentioning, I live in Oregon. Not quite a rural town, but our town is small, and only about a 10-minute drive to what you would actually consider a rural town or area. Everyone's heard about the cryptids and lore of Oregon woods. Personally, I hate these woods. They're just vast and terrifying, but at the same time tempting and beckoning almost. I stay out of the woods. I don't hunt or fish, and I might go hiking once every couple of years with friends, but I make it a point to not go where I don't feel safe. I kind of brushed off all the stories about the woods here, until I had an experience of my own, and I'm ready to share with what I saw that night. My friend and I work graveyard shift at a local bakery, and so because of that, we always carpool. She picks me up at about 11:30 p.m. The bakery itself is in a more rural area, but the main road in town takes us almost all the way out there. It's a pretty well-lit road until you get slightly out of town, and since it's the main road through town, even at night, there's usually passing cars or people walking. From my house, it takes about 10 minutes to get to work using this exact road. For about 3 months, this road was being repaved. We'd have to stop literally right before the turn into the bakery to wait for construction crew so they could finish whatever project they were doing. After 2 nights of being stopped right outside of work for well over an hour, an estimated date of construction being done being 3 months out, we decided to start taking the back roads. The back way to work was on the opposite side of town of this main road. It took us all the way out of town, around the outskirts, and finally to the bakery, for a total of about 30 minutes travel time, instead of just 10. This back road was completely surrounded by heavy woods. There was a private drive to a house every 5 miles or so. No streetlights and no passing cars. No pedestrians even. This road was also extremely curvy. Just constant twists and turns. As expected, we'd see a lot of deer, and the occasional possum, squirrel, etc. But this particular night, we began our journey through the back roads, just as we had been all week. We got about 10 miles through when my friend went around this bend, and suddenly, slamming on her brakes, I was on my phone, so I was not looking up when she first saw it. I look up, and right in front of the car is this gigantic buck. I'm talking huge. Not moose-sized, but definitely one of the largest bucks I'd ever seen. He was staring directly at us through the windshield. We were just kind of frozen there for a moment for some reason. We both looked down at the feet of the deer, and in between its front and feet was a dead raccoon. It was clearly a raccoon. Its face was even pointed toward us. Ringlets on the tail. Basically a stereotypical raccoon. Except this thing was also huge. Now the buck was large, but large bucks aren't unheard of. This raccoon was the size of a huge dog. Like, think of a mastiff. We looked back up at the deer, and it was still staring right at us. Like it was making eye contact with us both. My friend flashes her high beams and honks the horn, and hoping to scare it off successfully. It does not run off. Without breaking eye contact with us, it starts to walk toward the car, slowly. We both are freaked out at this point, and my friend throws the car in reverse, backs up, swerving around the deer. This entire time it moves its head to make sure it can keep eye contact as we back up, pull to the side, and drive away. We look back behind us, and this thing is just standing in the road, staring at us as we drive away. We finally went around a curve and lost sight of it, but until then, it never stopped staring right at us. We talk about this a lot, and how weird it was. I didn't think deer ate meat. I mean, I'm not a deer expert. I just assumed they were herbivores. So the standing over that dead raccoon was the most unsettling part, even over the constant eye contact. Luckily, we weren't dumb enough to get out of the car, but I always wonder what would have happened if we did. Since then, I've been more aware of the lore around here. I've heard unsettling noises and screams coming from the woods, but this was the only actual encounter I think I've had. Am I thinking too much into this, or is it a little weird to anybody else? There's so many legends and stories of cryptids around here, and I'm sure you've all read about the messed up stuff that happens at Crater Lake. Just thought this might be an interesting encounter for somebody to hear, since nobody really believes us. But it's hard to believe something you never saw with your own eyes. Went camping on a lake, and once it was in the middle of the night, pitch black in a field on the bank of the lake. My friend pointed out that there were glowing eyes staring towards us in the distance. This, of course, got my attention, and I assumed it was a deer at first. But the way it was staring at us, not taking its eyes off of us, started to give us a creepy feeling, as at the time we were cooking and eating food. The eyes were glowing bright, but there was no light, even by it, or pointing towards it. I have been hunting, and have shot and seen deer in the darker evening, but never remember seeing their eyes ever glow. I know deer eyes glow, but I didn't think they glowed in pitch black darkness. So, we decided to try to approach it with flashlights while stomping and yelling, just to try and scare it, or possibly get movement confirmation. But the eyes just stayed in place and did not react, which began to freak us out. So we backed up without ever being able to make out a body. We decided to start going back to what we were doing, while every now and then keeping an eye on the eyes. No one seemed to notice the eyes ever getting farther away, or seeing them leave. But at one point, we all noticed they were just gone, like nothing. And we never heard any sort of footsteps or hopping away, as if maybe a deer had trotted off. We kinda wrote this off as a deer, but I always questioned because of the feeling we all got during the experience, and the odd behavior. And then, I looked into Skinwalkers recently, realized they are from the Native American past stories, and my friend who was with me has a lot of native blood in him. He is native to the point to where if you saw him and his features, it would make sense. He even has a card for his tribe. What made me post this story is that exact reason. Also, finding out that it is said that skinwalkers transform into animals. Their eyes stay human, but also apparently glow. After looking up glowing deer eyes, I was even more freaked out, because the eyes I remember seeing did not seem to be that far apart, and even seemed like they were completely forward-facing, and not sideways-facing like deer. Maybe it was a curious deer in shock when we tried to spook it, and maybe it couldn't see us well. Once we ignored it a bit more, we just never caught it walking away until it was far enough to run without us hearing it. What we saw, and what we thought about, not knowing the behavior and the appearance of what a skinwalker is supposed to be, and comparing it to the experience I had with my native friend, is clearly freaking me out and giving me goosebumps. I'm getting chills coming to this realization, and goosebumps as I write this. What do you have to say, or what are you thinking of this? I am almost convinced I may have had a supernatural experience.